Not very evident for this SkyCam view, but this is IBM Museum. Hi, I have here a IBM PS2 Model 25 of the 25SX variety. This video is showing how the Model 25, which was known as the all-in-one units from IBM, they're in their PS2 line. That's where they had the integrated screen. And I'm going to show how the Model 25 units are opened up. Show basics to the insides. They're all opened the same way. And I have this unit face down on the table. I have bubble wrap down below as a way of protecting the screen face, just seen here on the table. And the Model 25 SX, that's the highest end of the Model 25 series, is a little bit different for this back. The first unit was based on the 8086 CPU, and then there was a Model 25 286 version later on, and they used this back plate where they had even the connection for a headphone jack. The mouse and keyboard were here instead of being over here on the 25SX. And part of the trivia is that they're not actually with the icons of a keyboard and mouse. They just have the numbers 1 and 2. And then the full-sized serial port and parallel port, just like are on the 25SX, were here. And it had the two 8-bit or ISA slots with the Model 25 286 that were here. The Model 25 series is not a microchannel, despite being PS2, since the model number is below 50. For the 25SX, we'll get to see a little bit once we open this unit inside, but it actually had a third slot here that was viewed as a reverse mount ISA. And the reason that IBM included this here was solely for the purpose of a network adapter card. Either Token Ring or Ethernet had the connectors that were right in this location, and you fasten down the back bracket here. Those adapters were unique to the IBM EduQuest line, which is a later release from IBM after they did the Model 25s for the educational market. They had those in schools. They were the same all-in-one unit, a little bit bigger, a little bit more capable system as time went by, for the kids to use as their workstations there. The thought was that the all-in-one units have a integrated screen. You had the mouse and the keyboard connected and powered up, and you didn't have to worry about a separate display for the unit. These things were perfect for the school environment in that regard. Now, I have other previous videos up on my channel showing me going through and doing what's called a ripple boot, or remote initial program load, to where the system doesn't even have a local hard drive on it, and I'm booting it over the network from a network server that's running the iClass system from IBM, and that's IBM Classroom LAN Administration System. And that was just an environment that the teachers could go through and control the programs that the kids were able to run from their workstations, and had a file system. I'll be demonstrating a little bit more of that iClass system, and later School View was the name of the program. If you want to review that earlier video of me booting the Model 25 remotely, that you can go through and watch that video as well. Now this Model 25SX is a little bit different, that it has the external VGA connector. And for a second display, that just basically mirrors the same thing that is on the screen. And this is a little bit more rare model called it's the K submodel that had this external video connector. And this unit has, the planar of this unit has a little bit more memory as we look inside. I do have the other type of planar that is more commonly on the 25SX called the L planar. And that is often what is encountered more when even these rare units are found. And they were released to that school environment, and there's not really anything outside those areas that they weren't really released commercially otherwise. You couldn't buy one where you bought other PS2s. They were defined as being for that educational market of schools, just like the EduQuest were later on. Now, opening up the Model 25, and I'll adjust this after I get these screws off as I lower what's called the tray. This portion here swings down, and to open up a Model 25, it's all the same, where you loosen these two screws, or remove these two screws. And these screws can be a real challenge to get back in sometimes when you're closing the unit back up. I usually put that's the little handheld grip for moving these things around from the top. Okay, I just usually drop those screws in that holding area, as it were. If it's on, just don't forget that you have them there when you set the unit back up straight. Okay, so we have the two screws removed for that lower tray, and that just comes out. And I'll go through and adjust the camera as I bring this down, just to show how that appears with that tray coming down. Okay, we just raise that slightly and comes down, and you just put it to where it contacts that table surface that the screen is sitting on. And normally this cable, it does have, with this clip, is supposed to be stuck to the inside of this case, but in this case it's come loose, as you see. And the power supply is within that CRT section. It does have a fan here, and these connections are for the power supply, which is here, and the display, the integrated display. And this is very, of course, it has the same layout with the other models of the 25, where they have that display connector and the power connections either here or closer to the edge of the planar, sometimes with the one version of the Model 25 planar. And I'll have those older units, I'll show those soon, just to show how those are, but it's a very similar setup as here. And in this case, it has the hard drive and floppy drive cables that go down below. It actually has a power header. The 25SX has an IDE drive in it, commonly just a 40 or 80 megabyte IDE drive if the unit came with the drive at all. And so it's a little bit less proprietary than the older Mall 25s had with their hard drives, and the connections for those were on the edges here to reach underneath to where the drives are. This is the hard drive. This is the floppy drive over here that have come out, and then it has the riser in the center to where the adapters are in here horizontally, and a little bit of a layout for the planar in this case for the 25SX is the CPU of a 386SX, and the Mall 25 was in publications from IBM was announced to be a 16 megahertz 386SX. In some of the cases, you will find that the CPU is actually marked as a 20 megahertz model, but still has the oscillator crystal to run it at 16 megahertz. And then in some other models with the 20 megahertz marked CPU, it has the crystal to run at 20 megahertz, and there's no identification externally on whether what speed of unit that you had. At least you had the 16 megahertz 386SX, but in some instances you could come across a model that ran the 386SX at 20 megahertz. This is a socket for the 387SX floating point processor. I don't have that coprocessor. I don't have that populated in this case. And the memory layout, typically on the L units, this SIM slot is not even there. Well, I guess they don't have. Well, I was confused that there is a SIM slot that's here that's normally not populated with any of the 25SXs, and there's been attempts to actually put a SIM slot connection there, 72 pin, to make that functional without success, is what I've heard. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to give my own attempts because there's presence detect pins off of that as well. I've covered that in other videos on how to change those presence detect to tell the capacity and speed of those SIM modules. But the K submodel is a little bit, it's different in that it has these memory chips populated over the positions of the SIM slot, and there is a single expansion SIM slot, and that's what we're interested in for the plot line of this video, that I'm going to increase the memory by putting a SIM in here. And then the K submodels also had some of these RAM positions more populated, so that it had 4 megabyte of RAM of memory in these modules here, between the modules here and the modules here, and that you didn't necessarily have to, or more memory than what the L submodel had. And this is the L submodel. It doesn't have the memory chips here, as you can see, just solder pads. These areas are also unpopulated. And in this configuration, without any SIM module in place, this would actually just be a megabyte of RAM that's on the planar. And so the largest size of SIM that you could have in here, typically you had either a 4 or 8 megabyte SIM that is recognized for the 25SX. And so the way that the L submodel is if you had an 8 megabyte SIM in here, you had a maximum memory possibility of not just 9 megabytes. And of course, the 386SX CPU is limited to a maximum of 16 megabytes, is the largest size that it would recognize in this case. So on the K submodel, there is, with the 8 megabyte SIM in here, you had the full potential for 12 megabytes of RAM, and that's what we're going to do today as I go through. This is the EEPROM BIOS chip. It's actually in a 40-pin dual inline package or DIP. A little bit different from the other PS2s. It's a single chip module of the EEPROM, and there is a planar that's for the 25-286 and model 30-286 that also, one version had a single 40-pin EEPROM like this, and there's another version that had the two separate 28-pin EEPROM chips as well. Just different ways of doing it. For in this case, for whatever reasons, IBM decided to go with the 40-pin DIP, but a little bit more unconventional in that regard. And so, and you see the external VGA connectors I was saying. The L submodel, that's another thing that it lacks. It does not have anything. I don't know the reason for that. They're looking at going to another screen, or whether that could be connected up to the a teacher system or something like that. But I use that external video in this case for being able to screen capture, as we'll go through and see in the later videos as I go through and after I add the memory and what error messages I get, and the process I go through for the starter diskette that I'll be covering in video. So I really utilize this external VGA connection. Now the Model 25SX, it does have a chipset that is actually considered SVGA. Let me bring over back the L submodel planar, just because I don't have to pull these cables out or anything else. This is the video chip, and for a long time this was not really a known of what the capabilities of this chip or a driver could be. And the Model 25SX actually has all the 4 VRAM or video RAM locations populated, to where this is 512 KB of VRAM. And that makes it so it's with the correct Windows 3.1 drivers that you can actually run it in 256 colors. 640 by 480 pixels, which isn't really much, a very small screen. But then you had more color depth than just the 16 colors that you typically trapped with if you didn't have the correct driver. This has what they call a VESA driver to bring out those capabilities. And it's been a little bit more recognized even within the last year that there's been a lot of discoveries made about how IBM used that chip in the 25SX and other models. And of course, the 25286 is just a VGA connection and does not have the other units do not have that external video connection on them. They just have the internal connection for that built-in monitor. The 25286 is VGA capabilities, and the 8086 CPU based Model 25 is that MCGA standard. That was kind of a lesser step. It's VGA without the EGA. And certainly there's been other videos. I will go through and link a particular video, as well as I have a unit that we'll get into with the older units that have put on those to get that external video, so I can do the screen captures even from the lower end models of the 25. And there's a video I'll link by someone else, very close associate of that module, and how he has that set up on his system. I will show those in the lower end Model 25s as we kind of get over to those systems as well. So let's get further into looking at adding in, as I say, a RAM module into this SIM, into this available socket. As I said, the plot line is I've got 4 megabyte of RAM, and I want to go through and add more memory to it. Now, there are IBM SIMs like this that are 8 megabytes. And if I go through it, and it's got the notch on the one end, and you can see how close those chips are to the connections. And this is an angled SIM slot. So if this is put in the socket, and it's the notch of the SIM is always to the rear of the unit, in this case on the 25SX. As I go through, I can't put that all the way down. It doesn't latch, and you can force these. I mean, it's very close to the abilities of very close to latching in this instance, but I don't want to force it. And that's just because the chips are so close to that connection edge that they get in the way. Is why this module doesn't fully seat. And you could go through it. I mean, this module, if it were able to be inserted, it's recognized correctly and works on the system. So we look at another module that I have here, another IBM SIM, and it doesn't have the chips close to that connector edge. But if I go through and notch towards the rear of the system, again, if I go through, that hangs up on this riser support. I can't physically lower that to latch it in place. So that's a bust as well. And I mean, there were the 4 megabyte modules. Don't have chips on that one side. That those would go through and they would latch in place, and that would work. But that's 4 megabyte, and that gives me 8 megabyte total. I want an 8 megabyte, and I did find this, and it's not marked as any sort of IBM module, just one of the modules I had around. And I went through, and this actually works perfectly. And I've gone through and figured out that this is an 8 megabyte module. I could have actually figured that out in the this R1 through R4 as I went through the presence detect video, and using a multimeter I could figure out the capacity for this this chip, and whether it was the right one, and how it presented how it showed that it was configured to the system. Okay, so that's latched in place. And one of the ways I can kind of use this, the external video, and I do have access to the diskette drive, is I can go through and connect up external video, actually go through and connect up power to this unit, connect up a keyboard and mouse, and be able to see on that external screen, rather than the screen that's face down on the table here, of how the system, what it recognizes that memory at, what presents on the screen, and even where I could stick in the star diskette if I need to configure the system. So let's do that on video. I'll go through and connect up, and we'll get the video output to where you guys can see that as well. Okay, with everything connected here, including an AC power cord that's just off screen to you guys. And I've got the external video connector here so we can see what's going on with the system with the screen not visible in this case. I've got the keyboard and mouse connected, and I even have that post reader, the little card that plugs into the parallel port of PS2s. I featured that in the prior video as an excellent diagnostic utility for the for PS2s in particular. With this, we'll see those codes flash through just as a way of kind of knowing what's going on, or if it happened to freeze the particular code. And I've gone through and I've removed the back brackets here for the adapters, just so that is visible a little bit on screen there. And when I went through all the earlier layout of the planer, one of the things I did not bring up is the coin cell battery, the 2032 battery holder that's here. And that makes the 25SX really the nice one among the Model 25s as well, that you don't have to worry about that Dallas module or something like that. Of course, the 8086 based Model 25 does not have a real-time clock, so it doesn't need a battery in there. But on the Model 25 286, that's the Dallas module. And then when they've got to the 25SX, at least they have that replaceable coin cell battery. That battery's fresh. I changed that back not so long ago. And so we have our memory module in there. And let's go ahead and flip on the power. We get that going through the post codes on the back on the parallel port. And we should see some screen display here real soon. And it's going through the count of the RAM. It's bypassed the 4 megabyte it's on the system planer, so we know that it's counting memory from somewhere. And that glorious numbers increasing, showing the amount of RAM on the system. And we get up to 12 megabyte, which is what we expect with 4 megabyte on the system planer and the 8 megabyte SIM. Okay, we get the dual boot and the 164 error about configuration, and it gives us a not okay and tells us to read the manual in this case, but I know that means that we would take the starter diskette. Remember, this is it's not a microchannel system. It's below the Model 50. So these are starter diskettes, not reference diskettes. And I'll show in another video on going through and creating these starter diskettes, including where to get the images and for diskettes and going through. So now that we have it inserted in the drive, we're going to press F1 on the keyboard. We have our diskette drive noises here as it goes through. Okay. Gives us the initial screen. And in this case, it's actually reported as the advanced diagnostics and there's online there's a 1.2 version and a 1.3 version, or 1.30 version. And we press enter. And it says, if you installed or removed memory, run automatic configuration. So this starter diskette sequence is a little bit like a reference diskette, that you have an automatic configuration with the 25SX. And on the 8086 based unit, there is, we're going to press Y there to run the configuration. There's not that configuration at all from the starter diskette. And then on the 2526, there's only saying the time and date. The configuration otherwise is, there's not much to it. So it's telling us that the automatic configuration is complete. Press enter. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to leave the starter diskette in there so that we can kind of run through a little bit, or see that up on the screen, or go through and see the amount of memory and the other configuration of the unit. Later on, I'll show without that starter diskette. And this system is kind of, has a unique user interface on it that I'm going to show in a later video. Okay, counting through all that RAM again. And since I do have the starter diskette in there and we don't have any errors happening otherwise, we should see it boot from that diskette automatically. Gives a single beep and is booting from the diskette. Okay. And we're going to look at the set configuration, much like a reference diskette in this case. Okay. And let's go through and view the configuration. We do have the other options of running through the automatic configuration if we happen to change something. And there's the installed memory. And the interesting thing is on the 25SX is it does also, it's able to run the 2.88 megabyte diskette drives. And in those cases, it's actually to where the diskette drive is set as not installed, and it functions perfectly. And I don't know why. I've got the 1.44 megabyte drive on here, and for some reason this tells me it's still not installed. And so let's go through and actually let's back out to the change configuration, and I'll show you that for the diskette drive types, they just have a, press F6 on the keyboard. So we have the 1.44 megabyte and not installed. They're the only selections. And like I say, I'm not sure why it went through and listed that as not installed, but we booted from the starter diskette perfectly fine. And so it's a functional configuration in this case. Okay, the save configuration is complete. And so if we go through to exit, and then F3 for exit again, And we'll probably want to reboot. And in this case, I'll go through and I think I'm going to go all the way to where I have a little teaser for the user interface, as I said, that's on this system. And so let's press enter. And that's likely where I'll end the video. And I can move on to probably the next video of going through and showing the creation of those starter and reference diskettes again. And remember, with the 25SX, it's just that odd advanced diagnostic is actually the starter diskette image that you're looking for online in the repositories for where those starter and reference diskettes are. And I'll give references to those locations too with that video. Going through the glorious count of RAM again. Okay, we don't have a diskette in the drive, so it should boot from the hard drive. 162. Okay, so let's see what it's complaining about. Maybe about that diskette drive that I set. Okay, enter. Okay. And this shows up just like a how the reference diskette would normally present itself on a microchannel system, saying that the configuration has changed. Okay. And in this case, we're going to go through and eject that starter diskette once again. Press enter. And it may have just gone through and set that diskette drive back to not install for some, that may be some little quirk to the MAL25 system and 25SX system. So I'm kind of glad to demo that on video, even though it kind of should be an outtake, or I should go through this in a more professional sequence of sticking on topics, but you get all the warts and all with these videos. Takes it longer to render and upload to YouTube, but I think it's informational, and in the end we learn all the little quirks together. Okay, single beep that time, and it's going through and booting from the hard drive. It gives the VESA display, and you guys can pause that to see that on your screens of that VESA driver being loaded from DOS that I've got set up, and just saying that video chipset in the correct mode. So we've, in the way that this system's configured, it shows what's set for time and date. Those are correct in this instance, off by a few minutes maybe, and then tells us the IBM DOS version, all that revision, and that's PC DOS in this case. And this is the teaser I wanted to kind of leave people with. Ready to load New Deal software. Press any key to continue. I'm not going to press a key in this video. I'm going to leave that as a teaser for when I demonstrate this user interface in a video in the future, maybe 2 or 3 videos ahead of it, but I will get through and cover it. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you. This is a little bit of a video outtake here. We still have the teaser that once I exited that user interface, I'm in the NDS subdirectory, and maybe people can look through and try and figure that out to what that is before I show that video. I wanted to just quickly run through one of the utilities I have loaded on the system here. And this is from the book, The Undocumented PC. And then we're going to run that. Okay. And we're going to go through system information down to the view CMOS RAM contents. And I'm going to go through and scroll down. We've seen this before in a prior video. I just want to show a little bit of confirmation here as well. So for offset 32, we have the value of 36 in there, and it says date century byte MCA checksum low in parentheses, meaning that the book author in Program Writer thought that it was only for microchannel systems. Once again, that in this instance, that on this system it should normally be where at offset 32 it holds that century byte location, and we look down to see at offset 37 where it says vendor specific, that's actually where the location of the century byte is. Even on the 25SX, even it's not a microchannel system, all the PS2s that I've encountered have relocated that century byte location to offset 37 rather than 32. So that's just something I kind of quickly wanted to show as an outtake. And undoubtedly we'll go through some of the other programs on this unit as well. I'm just escaping out, back to DOS. And that does it for this outtake. Thank you. It comes into being a little bit of a video outtake, but one of the things I did want to show as well, to opening up the Model 25s, this example being the 25SX, of course, is that getting the unit closed, because there's one area that it matters a little bit for closing these units up. And I do need to, I'm going to disconnect these connections. I'm going to go through and also pull the power. And let me quickly get these brackets back in place. And threading these screws, and as I say, when I get this bottom piece up, that's a little bit of a challenge here. When I say warts and all, you may even see my bald head come into view. Well, there's no, let me go through and I'm going to turn off the camera and get those in place, and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, I've got those back bracket screws in place. And the thing I wanted to show on this video section, I still have a real good positioning of the camera. Getting the case closed. You have to make sure that the metal flaps are there, and there's pins on either side. And you got to make sure that that's inside this metal housing that's there. And you lift slightly, you just got to watch the pins as you go through that pin. Those pins go into the slots on either side, and then it just lowers down and drops in place like that. As I say, for these screws, these are rather a challenge. And I've thought of whether something like a little thumb screw or a self-centering screw would be an excellent retrofit for these units. It may be the same way that I go through and I just end the outtake at that. I've shown the main aspect that I wanted to do of getting those pins in the slot and just getting the metal flaps there. It can be a challenge with some of those Model 25s that you encounter out there where those flaps are out of position and they've bent over time. Somebody hasn't seen them properly in the past. Okay, we get that one screw in there. And as the last thing tonight, I'll probably, as you'll see in a video I'll post after this, I ran the system information tool on this system. Will be the video that impromptu video I'm going to throw up after this, that I figured out a little bit of the, so we're going to bump the camera tripod there. Let's look at the front of the unit. I don't know if that's from the bubble wrap or whatever. And I wanted to look at, yep, exactly. This is as it's marked on the button, 2.88. That's a 2.88 megabyte diskette drive that I mistakenly put in there instead of a 1.44. And I went through the other day and dealt with my stack of 1.44 drives to figure out which drives were bad and which drives were good, and started putting the good drives back on systems. And I just happened to grab what I thought was a 1.44 megabyte and to put it on the system, and grab the 2.88 by mistake. And this is even interesting because it doesn't have I thought the button stuck out a little bit further, and that's the reason I selected it over what I knew was a 1.44. But it doesn't have the dust flap like and this is on a tray for like a Model 56 or 57 that could also have the 2.88 megabyte drive. So it's actually got a dust flap on that for being a 2.88. And I knew I did have that drive off to the side, but this one apparently doesn't have that same dust flap. But just a pleasant surprise, one of those little things that a mistake, and I was able to demonstrate that a 2.88 megabyte drive functions on the 25SX. It's not listed as working or that is possible for that way. And it has that idiosyncrasy that in the star diskette, when you look at the configuration, that it just shows it's not installed, even though it works and functions fully correctly. So that's all I have for this outtake that I will put at the end of the video. And this is going to be a very long video, I guess. I better start that rendering process to get it up and online so it's viewable. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.